The mop hit the floor with a wet slap. Dirty water spread across the marble hallway of Preston University. The old janitor bent down slowly, his knees cracking like old wood. Behind him, 3 fraternity brothers laughed. "Hey, Grandpa, missed a spot," one shouted. "Maybe they should get someone who can actually see the floor." The janitor didn't turn. He just kept mopping, silent, invisible. But on his left forearm, hidden beneath his faded blue sleeve, was a tattoo most of them would never see. A skull with wings, and beneath it a single word, ghost. If you believe respect isn't earned by titles but by what you've survived, type honor in the comments and subscribe, because this janitor's silence was about to shatter. His name was Carl Vance. At least that's what his name tag said. 67 years old. Gray hair cropped short like it had been for the past 50 years. His face was weathered, lined with creases that looked like they'd been carved by wind and sand. He wore the same navy blue uniform every day. Faded, clean, pressed with military precision even though no one noticed. Carl arrived at Preston University every morning at 4:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. Always. He clocked in, grabbed his cart, and began his route. 3rd floor of the Sciences building first. Then the library. Then the student union. By the time the first students arrived at 7 a.m., the floors gleamed. The trash cans were empty, the bathrooms spotless. And Carl? Carl was already invisible. To the students rushing past him with their coffee cups and backpacks, he was part of the furniture. Fixture. Something that existed but didn't matter. They walked past him without a glance, stepped over his wet floor signs without reading them, dropped their trash 2 feet from the bin he was emptying. Carl never corrected them, never raised his voice, never asked for respect. He just kept working. In the faculty lounge, professors discussed philosophy, literature, the great questions of human existence. Carl wiped down their tables and listened. None of them asked his opinion. None of them knew that he spoke 4 languages, that he'd read more books than most of them would ever teach. In the athletic center, students grunted through workouts, earbuds in, faces twisted with effort. Carl mopped around their feet. None of them noticed his movements. Efficient, economical, the way someone moves when every motion has been trained into muscle memory under circumstances where wasted movement meant death. But it was the fraternity house where the real cruelty lived. Alpha Sigma Pi, the loudest, richest, most entitled collection of young men on campus. Their house sat on the edge of university property, a massive brick mansion funded by generations of alumni donations. Inside, the floors were constantly sticky with spilled beer. The bathrooms reeked. Trash overflowed from every bin. And Carl cleaned it all. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, he arrived at 5 a.m. and worked through the wreckage of their parties. He never complained, never reported the damage. He just cleaned. The fraternity brothers knew his name, or rather, they knew what they called him. Old Man Carl, the janitor, Grandpa Mop. One morning in late September, Carl was cleaning the main hallway when 3 brothers came down the stairs. Tyler Brennan led the pack. Quarterback, senior. His father was a federal judge. Behind him were Marcus Chan and Jake Holloway, both wearing their letters across their chests like armor. Tyler saw Carl and smirked. "Hey, Grandpa, you missed a spot," he called out, pointing at a section of floor Carl had already cleaned twice. Carl glanced up briefly, made eye contact for just a moment, then returned to mopping. Tyler stepped closer. "I'm talking to you, old man. You deaf?" Carl stopped, straightened slowly, one hand on his lower back. "No, sir. Just working." "Sir?" Marcus laughed. "Bro, did he just call you sir? That's cute," Jake added. "Like we're in the military or something." Tyler's grin widened. He picked up an empty red Solo cup from a nearby table and tossed it onto the wet floor. Clattered and rolled. "Whoops. Missed that one." Carl bent down, picked it up, and placed it in his trash bag. No words. No expression. "Man, they really need to get someone younger," Tyler muttered, loud enough for Carl to hear. "This guy probably can't even see the dirt anymore." The three of them walked past, shoulders brushing Carl's cart hard enough to make it rattle. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Carl watched them go. Then he rolled up his sleeve just slightly, enough to see the edge of black ink on his forearm. A skull with wings. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he rolled the sleeve back down and kept working. October arrived with cold rain and yellowing leaves. The campus took on that autumn glow students loved to photograph. Pumpkin spice, cozy sweaters, midterm stress. For Carl, it was just another season, another set of hallways, another round of disrespect. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Carl was emptying trash bins outside the student union when a group gathered nearby. Campus tour. Prospective students and their parents, led by a bubbly sophomore named Emma, who gestured enthusiastically at the buildings. "And this is our student union," Emma chirped. "It's the heart of campus life. We have a coffee shop, study lounges, and it's kept absolutely spotless by our amazing facilities team." She gestured vaguely in Carl's direction without actually looking at him. One of the prospective students, a high school senior, wrinkled her nose. "Is that the janitor?" Her mother whispered something. The girl giggled. "He looks like he should be retired." Carl heard it. He always heard it. But his face remained neutral as he tied off the trash bag and placed it in his cart. Emma, trying to redirect, clapped her hands. "Okay, let's head to the library next." As the group moved away, one of the fathers lingered. He was older, maybe early 60s, wearing a navy blazer and khakis. He walked over to Carl slowly. "Excuse me," the man said quietly. Carl looked up. "Yes, sir?" The man's eyes dropped to Carl's forearm. The sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing just the top edge of the winged skull tattoo. The man's expression changed. His eyes widened. "That mark." Carl quickly pulled his sleeve down. "Just a tattoo, sir." "Where did you serve?" the man asked, his voice lower now. Carl met his gaze. For the first time in years, something flickered behind his eyes. "Long time ago. Special forces?" Carl didn't answer. He just picked up his cart and began walking away. The man stood there, watching him go, his face a mixture of recognition and disbelief. That night, Carl sat in his small apartment on the edge of town. One bedroom, clean, sparse. A single bookshelf lined with military history. A folded American flag in a display case on the wall. No photos, no memorabilia. He made himself a simple dinner. Chicken, rice, steamed vegetables. He ate at a small table by the window, looking out at the rain. On the table beside his plate was a cell phone. Old model. Flip phone. It hadn't rung in 6 years. Carl stared at it while he ate. He thought about the man at the student union. The way he'd recognized the tattoo. The question in his eyes. Carl hadn't talked about his service in decades. Not to co-workers. Not to neighbors. Not even to the VA counselor who'd tried to get him to open up 15 years ago. Some things he'd decided were better left buried. But the tattoo remained. A reminder he couldn't erase. A mark that connected him to a past he'd walked away from. After dinner, Carl washed his dishes, dried them and put them away. Then he sat in his single armchair and opened a worn paperback. Military fiction. The kind written by people who'd never been there. He read until his eyes grew heavy. Then he went to bed. 4 a.m. came fast. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-October when everything changed. Carl was cleaning the second floor of the administration building. The hallways were empty, the offices dark. He moved through his routine with mechanical precision. Dust, wipe, vacuum, mop. At 6:30 a.m., he heard voices downstairs. Unusual for this early. He paused, listening. Footsteps, multiple people, organized, military cadence. Carl's body tensed. Instinct. Old training surfacing like muscle memory. He moved to the top of the staircase and looked down. 4 men in dress uniforms. Army. 2 captains. 1 major. And leading them a man with 3 stars on his shoulder. Lieutenant General Raymond Porter. Carl's breath caught. He knew that face. Older now. Gray at the temples. more weight around the middle, but the same sharp eyes, the same way of standing like he was always ready for the next order. Porter was talking to the university president, a thin man named Dr. Whitmore who looked confused and slightly panicked. "General, I assure you, we have no record of any military personnel on staff," Whitmore was saying. "Check your facilities department," Porter said calmly. "A man named Carl Vance, late 60s, janitor." Whitmore blinked. "Our janitor? I don't understand." "You don't need to understand," Porter replied. "Just take me to him." Carl didn't move. He stood at the top of the stairs, mop in hand, frozen. Porter looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Porter's face broke into something Carl hadn't seen in 40 years. Relief, joy, respect. The general straightened, lifted his hand, and saluted. The two captains behind him immediately followed suit. Then the major, four uniformed soldiers, standing at attention in the middle of a university administration building, saluting a janitor in a blue uniform. Whitmore looked like he might faint. Carl's hand trembled. Slowly, he set down the mop. His body moved on autopilot, decades-old training taking over. He stood at attention, squared his shoulders, and returned the salute. "Sergeant Vance," Porter said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been a long time." Carl's throat tightened. "Sir." Porter lowered his hand and walked up the stairs. The others stayed below. When he reached Carl, he stopped, just a few feet away. "I've been looking for you for 20 years, Porter said quietly. "I didn't want to be found, sir." "I know." Porter glanced at Carl's uniform. The name tag, the mop cart. "Why here?" Carl looked down at his hands. Calloused, scarred, older than they should be. "Needed to be useful." "You were always useful." Porter's voice hardened slightly. "You were the best operator I ever commanded." "That was a different life." "It was your life." Porter reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black box. "And it's not over." Carl stared at the box. He knew what it was. He'd seen dozens of them presented. Never thought he'd be holding one. "The Medal of Honor was approved 3 years ago," Porter said. "We've been trying to find you ever since. You saved 17 lives that night in Kandahar, Carl. My life included." Carl's jaw clenched. "I was just doing my job." "No." Porter's voice was firm now. Command voice. "You went back into a building that was on fire and collapsing. You pulled me and 4 others out while taking enemy fire. You held that position for 6 hours until evac arrived. You did that alone." Silence filled the hallway. Porter opened the box. Inside, the Medal of Honor gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "This belongs to you," Porter said. Carl shook his head. "I don't want it." "I know. That's why you deserve it." Behind them, footsteps. The university president had crept up the stairs, phone in hand, recording. Porter turned sharply. "Put that away." Whitmore flinched and lowered the phone immediately. Porter looked back at Carl. "There's a ceremony scheduled for Friday. Joint Base Andrews. The president will be there. The entire command structure. And I want you there. I'm just a janitor now." "You were never just anything, Carl." For the first time in decades, Carl felt something crack inside him. The wall he'd built, the silence he'd maintained, it trembled. Porter placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Carl looked down at the Medal of Honor, then at Porter, then at the 2 captains and the major standing at attention below. And for the first time in 40 years, Carl Vance allowed himself to be seen. By noon, the entire campus knew. It started with Dr. Whitmore, who, despite Porter's warning, had shared the story with his assistant. The assistant told a professor. The professor mentioned it in class. A student tweeted it. Within 3 hours, Preston University janitor is Medal of Honor recipient, was trending locally. By evening, news vans were parked outside the administration building. Carl didn't speak to any of them. He'd gone home immediately after Porter left, ignoring the calls to his supervisor, the emails to the university account he didn't know he had. But Friday came whether he was ready or not. A black SUV arrived at his apartment at 5 a.m. Two soldiers in dress uniforms stood at his door. "Sergeant Vance," one of them said. "We're here to escort you to Andrews." Carl stood in his doorway, wearing the only suit he owned. 30 years old. Still fit perfectly. "I didn't say I'd go. General Porter said you'd say that." The soldier handed him a folded note. Carl opened it. "You showed up every day for 40 years. Show up one more time." "Porter." Carl exhaled slowly. Then he nodded. "Let me get my coat." The ceremony at Joint Base Andrews was larger than Carl expected. Hundreds of uniformed personnel. Dozens of veterans. Cameras. Reporters. Senators. And sitting in the front row, transported in from Preston University, were 20 students. Handpicked by Porter. Among them, Tyler Brennan, Marcus Chun, and Jake Holloway. They sat in silence, uniforms pressed, faces pale. Carl stood on the platform in his old dress uniform, which had been brought out of storage and tailored to fit his older frame. The medals he'd earned over 2 decades of service gleamed on his chest. The President of the United States stepped forward and read the citation. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." The words blurred in Carl's ears. He focused on the crowd. On Porter, standing at attention with tears in his eyes. On the students who would never look at a janitor the same way again. When the medal was placed around his neck, the crowd erupted in applause. Carl didn't smile, but he stood tall. After the ceremony, Porter walked Carl to the SUV. "What now?" Carl asked. "Now you decide," Porter said. "You can go back to Preston. Or you can come work with me, training the next generation." Carl looked back at the base, at the soldiers, at the life he'd walked away from. "I think I'm done hiding," Carl said quietly. Porter grinned. "Good." 3 weeks later, Carl Vance returned to Preston University. But not as a janitor. He walked into a packed auditorium as a guest speaker. The university had invited him to talk to students about service, sacrifice, and the meaning of quiet strength. Tyler Brennan sat in the 3rd row. When Carl stepped onto the stage, Tyler stood. Then Marcus. Then Jake. Then the entire auditorium. A standing ovation before he'd said a single word. Carl stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. Young, eager, uncertain. He cleared his throat. "My name is Carl Vance," he began. "And for 3 years, I was invisible to most of you." Silence. "I don't blame you for that. I chose to be invisible. I chose silence because I thought I'd left that part of my life behind." He paused. "But what I learned is that you can't leave behind who you are. The uniform comes off. The missions end. But the man remains." His voice grew stronger. "Some of you laughed at me. Some of you ignored me. And that's okay. Because I wasn't there for your respect. I was there to serve. Just like I've always done." Tyler looked down at his hands. "But here's what I want you to understand," Carl continued. "The person cleaning your floors, serving your food, driving your bus, they have a story. They've survived things you can't imagine. They carry weight you'll never see." He looked directly at Tyler. "So before you mock, before you dismiss, before you decide someone doesn't matter, remember this. You have no idea who you're talking to." The auditorium was silent. Carl stepped back from the podium. "That's all I have to say." But before he could leave, Tyler stood. "Mr. Vance," he called out, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry." Carl stopped, turned. Tyler walked down the aisle and stood in front of the stage. Tears streamed down his face. "I'm sorry for every word, every laugh, every time I made you feel invisible." Carl looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Apology accepted." Tyler saluted. Clumsy, unpracticed, but sincere. And Carl, for the second time in 3 weeks, returned it. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Carl Vance never went back to mopping floors. He took a position with the university as a consultant for the ROTC program. He taught leadership, resilience, the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. The tattoo on his forearm was no longer hidden. Students would see it and ask about it. And sometimes, when the moment was right, Carl would tell them about the man he used to be, about Ghost. But mostly, he taught them about the man he'd always been. A servant, a soldier, a silent guardian who never needed recognition, but finally received it. If the story moved you, honor it. Type respect in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories about the invisible heroes walking among us. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it mops floors. And sometimes it changes the world without ever asking for credit.